What happens when a proud black man steps into a local bar to share a quiet moment of joy, only to be shoved out for the color of his skin? The man at the door thought he was teaching a lesson, but what happened next left the entire bar speechless. Before we begin the story, write in the comments where you are watching us from. You ever step somewhere with your head high, just wanting to share a small piece of joy, and the world decides it wants to test every nerve in your body? That was Michael. Ironed shirt, clean shoes, a soft smile on his face while holding a tiny box with a ribbon, standing in front of that bar on Main Street like it was just another good day to breathe. He bought that pin for his mother, planning to surprise her with it later. But let's be honest, life loves to interrupt a man when he's trying to do something good. The air smelled like old beer and lemon cleaner when Michael stepped in. Folks were laughing, glasses clinking, that jukebox humming something that should have felt comforting. But let me tell you, sometimes a room can look warm and still bite cold when you walk in with the wrong skin. Michael found himself a quiet spot at the bar, ordered a soda because today wasn't about turning up. It was about celebrating something small but real. He scrolled his phone, seeing messages pop up, friends telling him they were proud, reminding him to breathe, reminding him he was loved. He needed that more than he knew. Then came Carl, big man, red in the face, carrying that look like he owned every inch of the floor he walked on. Carl leaned in, smirking like he knew something Michael didn't, like Michael's very presence was a joke he couldn't wait to share. "You lost, buddy?" Carl's voice was the type that tried to sound casual but dripped disrespect in every syllable. Michael looked up, calm. "Just waiting for my soda." But Carl wasn't here for small talk. He put a hand on Michael's shoulder, heavy, pressing down like he wanted to remind him of something Michael had never forgotten. "You need to leave now," Carl said, louder so everyone could hear, like it was a show. The bar didn't go quiet, but it felt like the air did. A couple of folks turned, their laughter pausing just enough for Michael to catch their looks. Some looked away, pretending they didn't see. Others smirked, like they'd been waiting to see how this would play out. Michael's hand tightened around the small box in his pocket, feeling the edges dig into his palm. He looked at Carl, really looked at him, then sighed, stepping back, raising his hands to show he didn't want trouble. Carl pushed him, not hard, but enough. Enough for the box to slip from Michael's hand and hit the floor, the ribbon unraveling as it rolled, coming to a stop against a boot that didn't bother to move. Michael bent down, picked it up carefully, dusting it off, ignoring how his hands shook, ignoring the way the laughter returned behind him, like nothing happened. Outside, the air was sharper. Michael stood there, pen in hand, taking deep breaths that felt like they cut his chest on the way out. He looked through the window, saw Carl laughing with a group at the bar, slapping the counter, telling his story like he was the hero. You could see Michael's jaw tighten, but he didn't shout. He didn't kick the door down. He didn't even turn away. He stood there, watching, letting that moment sink in, letting that hurt do what it needed to do, because sometimes that's all a man can do before he decides what comes next. And the people walking by? Some gave him that look, you know the one, like they pitied him, but were glad it wasn't them. A woman pushing a stroller glanced up, met Michael's eyes, then looked away quick. Michael straightened up, slipped the pin back into his pocket, and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. A kid across the street waved at him, not knowing anything, just waving because kids do that. Michael managed a small wave back, and that was enough to stop his hands from shaking. The door behind him opened, Carl's voice loud again. "Better not see you around here again, you hear?" Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. He just stood there, letting the breeze remind him he was alive, that he was still him, no matter what Carl thought. His mother's pen pressed warm against his palm, reminding him why he came in the first place. What happened next changed everything. You do not want to miss how this unfolds. Michael stood outside that bar like the sidewalk was daring him to take another breath. He felt the weight of that pin in his pocket, warm, reminding him of why he came out today, why he had ironed that shirt, why he let himself feel a little hope. But now, hope felt like a heavy coat on a hot day, sticking to his skin, making him uncomfortable. He took one last look at the window. Carl was still inside, holding court like he was some hero for pushing out a man who came in with nothing but kindness in his hands. Folks around him laughed, shook their heads like it was all one big joke. Michael felt that laugh down in his bones, the kind of laugh that stings long after it's over. An older man walked by, paused, and looked Michael up and down. "You good, young blood?" he asked, adjusting the cap on his head. Michael nodded, but it was the kind of nod that said everything was not fine. The man patted him on the shoulder before moving on, leaving Michael alone with that question hanging in the air. Michael took a breath and turned away, ready to leave it all behind. But the sound of Carl's laugh through the open door caught him, pulled him back like a hook in the chest. He turned around and stepped closer, not inside, but close enough to see, close enough to hear. "Look at him," Carl's voice carried over the music. "Standing out there like he owns the block." That was when Michael's spirit stirred. He stepped up, leaned against the wall by the door, and looked Carl dead in the eye from across the room. Michael didn't say a word, but his silence spoke louder than anything he could have shouted. It said, "I'm still here." Carl's smirk slipped just a little, but he covered it with a laugh, waving Michael off like he was nothing. Michael stayed, though, because sometimes staying is all a man can do when the world tells him to leave. A group of young people near the bar pulled out their phones, recording, pretending to check messages while aiming their cameras. They knew something was happening, and they wanted to catch it, to share it, to talk about it later, like it was a show. Michael crossed his arms, watching as the bartender, a woman with tired eyes, glanced at him with something close to sympathy before looking away. She knew. They all knew. But knowing and doing something about it were two different things. Then Carl stepped outside, wiping his hands on a rag like he was getting ready for something. "You got business here still?" Carl asked, standing too close, his voice dropping just enough for only Michael to hear. Michael's jaw tightened. "I came here for a soda." Carl chuckled, shaking his head. "You people never learn." Michael felt the words hit him, but he stood his ground. "What people?" he asked, his voice calm, steady, clear. Carl's eyes narrowed, and for a moment the world around them went quiet. Michael could hear his own heart, the soft sound of cars passing, the distant laughter of a couple walking down the street. "You know what I mean?" Carl said, stepping back, raising his hands like he was done. But everyone saw. Everyone heard. And those recording phones were still up, still catching every word, every look, every moment. Michael took a slow breath, letting the air fill him up, letting it steady him. He didn't move, didn't back down, didn't let Carl's words push him away this time. Inside, the jukebox switched songs, something slow and heavy that didn't match the tension in the air. Michael could see people glancing at him, at Carl, at each other, unsure of what to do. Then, a small voice broke through the noise. "Mama, why's that man yelling?" A little girl, holding her mother's hand, stood a few feet away, eyes wide, looking at Carl, then at Michael. The mother pulled her close, whispering something in her ear, giving Michael an apologetic look before hurrying away. Michael watched them go, feeling that weight in his chest again, but this time it wasn't heavy with shame. It was heavy with truth. He looked back at Carl, who was watching the mother and child leave, his face tight, like maybe, just maybe, he realized something. But Carl turned back to Michael, forcing a laugh. "You're still here?" Michael nodded calmly. "I am." And for a moment, Carl didn't have anything to say. This is the moment. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see how Michael makes them all face the truth. Michael stood there, feeling the breeze brush against his face like a quiet reminder that he was still standing, still breathing, still him. Inside, the bar felt like another world, one that tried to push him out, tried to shrink him down. But here he was, shoulders squared, eyes clear, holding on to something bigger than anger. Carl shifted by the doorway, clearing his throat, trying to act like the king of a place that was falling quiet under the weight of what just happened. Folks inside were whispering, some pretending not to look, others looking too hard, phones still recording, catching every breath, every blink, every second. Michael glanced at the sky, letting the air fill his chest, grounding him. Then, with steady steps, he walked back to the door, not barging in, not yelling, just walking, calm, like a man who knew exactly who he was. As he stepped inside, the music softened, conversations dropped into awkward hushes, and even the bartender froze with a glass in hand, eyes on Michael. From the back of the bar, a woman in a blue dress stood up, holding a small bouquet in her hands, eyes wide with relief and something close to joy. She called out, her voice shaking but strong. "There you are, Michael." The room turned, eyes bouncing from Michael to her and back again. Carl's face drained of color as the pieces began to fall into place, too late to change what he had already done. Michael's lips curved into a small smile as he walked toward her, every step reminding the room that he belonged, that he was expected, that this day was not theirs to take. The woman met him halfway, wrapping him in a careful hug, whispering, "We were waiting for you." Behind her, family members, friends, and neighbors began to rise from their seats, faces lighting up as they saw Michael, clapping quietly at first, then louder, until the room was filled with the sound of welcome. A man in a suit stepped forward, shaking Michael's hand firmly. "Glad you made it," he said, his voice carrying over the room. "We can start now." Carl stood frozen, hands at his sides, eyes darting around the room, trying to find a place to hide from what he was seeing. Michael turned to him, meeting his gaze, not with anger, but with something deeper, something stronger. "This is my day," Michael said, his voice clear, calm, undeniable. "And you don't get to ruin that." Carl opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked around, seeing the faces turn toward Michael, the phones capturing every moment, the reality pressing in on him with a weight he could not shake. The bartender set down the glass she had been holding, joining in the clapping, her eyes soft with apology, with understanding. One by one, others followed, until the room was filled with people standing, clapping, showing Michael that he was seen, that he was respected, that he was welcome. Michael took a breath, letting the moment sink in, letting it fill the space where hurt had been. He looked around, seeing his community, his family, his people standing with him, and he let himself smile, truly smile, for the first time that day. The woman in the blue dress took his hand, squeezing it gently, leading him toward the back of the bar, where a small table was set up with flowers and a simple cake, waiting for him. The family gathered around, creating a circle of warmth and love that no one could break. Carl stepped back, moving toward the door, his shoulders slumped, his eyes downcast, slipping out quietly as the room continued to celebrate Michael. And Michael? He stood tall, surrounded by the people who mattered, the people who showed up, the people who saw him for who he was. He pulled the small pin from his pocket, the one he had bought for his mother, and pinned it to her dress with careful hands, her eyes shining with pride. The music swelled again, laughter filled the air, and Michael let himself breathe, really breathe, knowing that he had taken back his day, his dignity, his joy. Today was his, and no one could take that away.